Bill Gates is known for being very smart,
Very smart.
and he's promoting GMOs very strongly. Why is he doing that?
I think he's doing it because he believes it's a good thing. Bill Gates and his wife Melinda, who run the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, through their foundation have been promoting the development and development of genetically engineered foods and the propagation of genetically engineered foods, especially in the Africa and third world countries, very, very strongly. And I think I'm sure because they believe it is good, they believe the misinformation that they've been fed, that these foods are safe and that they're in line with science and that we need them to solve the world's food needs. I'm sure that they are very well intentioned in doing this. But I am also equally confident, I am sure actually, that if Bill and Melinda Gates, who are both brilliant individuals and very, very good computer programmers, they became one of the most, if not the most wealthiest couple in the world through computer programming. If they knew the extent to which not only genetically engineered foods not only violate sound scientific principles when analyzed from the standpoint of biological science, but how unsound this whole venture is when viewed from the standpoint of computer science and software engineering, they would very quickly reassess what they're doing, and I think they would scale it back and at minimum require that all of the genetically engineered foods that they're developing, that their foundation is developing, would go through rigorous safety testing. But I think they would probably stop altogether. And here's why, just in a nutshell. My book has a whole chapter devoted to the analysis of so-called genetic engineering from the standpoint of software engineering. It's titled Overlooked Lessons from Computer Science. Subtitle is The Inescapable Risks of Altering Complex Information Systems. And computer science has learned the hard way, that there are inescapable risks of altering any complex information system, even if the people altering the system are the people who wrote the system. Even if they devised the system, they understand all of its architecture. They understand all of the intended interactions of the various system components. Let me put it this way, they cannot make even what they presume and wish to be a surgically precise minor revision to the system to improve system safety and performance without imposing the risk that some other aspect of the system, some other way the system interacts, has been unintentionally disrupted in a way that could create harm. Okay? They've learned that there's no such thing as a precise surgical revision that doesn't entail the risk of unintended side effects. And that is why when dealing with life-critical systems, those are information systems, software systems that govern how a pacemaker functions or governs how a X-ray therapy machine functions, or serves as an airplane guidance system, even after those software programs have gone through rigorous testing to get on the market in the first place, if the slightest revision has been made by the people who know the system backward and forward, supposedly, the FDA in the case of medical devices, or the FAA in the case of software guidance, airplane guidance system, they presume that the system is no longer stable and safe, and they require rigorous testing to be done to demonstrate that that change has not made a disruption in the system that could cause the loss of human life. And they will not accept any arguments of substantial equivalence, even though they should be quite justified in that case. We only made a little change. It's the same system, and we know what we're doing. We know the system, and we're making a change to improve it. The FAA says you can't argue substantial equivalence with us on that one. You got to prove you haven't made a change. You haven't proved that an unintended disruption has not occurred that could cause the loss of human life. Nowhere near the same level of rigor of testing is required when the biggest, most complex, and yet least understood information systems on our planet are being changed not in a precise surgical way by scientists who understand the system well, but by scientists who didn't create the system, who only understand it in a very superficial way, and yet are making radical changes to it that we know have the potential for making unintended disruptions that could create toxicity or allergenicity. And what happens to the regulators at the FDA? They say, we presume you didn't make any change at all that was serious. You can market it without doing any testing. And what did the European Union do for years and years and years? They said, if you can show it's substantially equivalent based on superficial parameters, superficial criteria, we'll approve it. That's how crazy it is. So that's why I am confident that if Bill and Melinda Gates and any other software engineer were to actually read Chapter 11, hopefully the whole book, but at minimum Chapter 11, they would change their minds. That would change their minds. And as my brilliant and very witty wife said, when she read the first draft of that chapter, she said, your Chapter 11 can put Monsanto into Chapter 11. So, and for those of you who don't know, Chapter 11 is a form of bankruptcy.
Is genetic engineering more precise and predictable than traditional plant breeding?
When new varieties of crops are created through naturally available sexual reproductive pathways, then we have very good reason to believe, in fact we know, that there are some very precise processes that are going through that will maintain the integrity, genomic integrity of the species, while also introducing opportunities for genetic diversity, which the species needs in order to stay robust and healthy and stay well adapted to the environment. It's really sexual reproduction in plants and all higher organisms is an exquisitely beautiful process in which there's stability, maximized stability, along with flexibility and diversity. It's this beautiful play of stability of the species, of the genome of the species, of the genetic core of the species that defines the species is being maintained while there's genetic variability. And as people just know who have brothers and sisters, we all, you came from the same parents as your brothers and your sister, but you're different. And even identical twins their genes start developing differently anyway. But but unless they're identical twins, there's going to be genetic diversity through the sexual reproduction the process of sexual reproduction. But we also know there's exquisite orderliness. There's each parent contributes one set of genes, one set of chromosomes, one set of genes, and each chromosome is paired with a partner chromosome. A chromosome is a set of genes. And so that's when the way things are going right. So the same thing isn't happening in genetic engineering. You've got genes that have never been before in the species being haphazardly put into the DNA strand. That's the way to date, the genetic engineering procedures that have produced most of the genetically engineered foods on the market they acted in a haphazard way. There was no way to control where in the DNA strand the inserted DNA went, and disruptions are being caused. Several documented disruptions ordinarily occur at the insertion point and also throughout the genome. Scientists who have studied the insertion process and its effects have dubbed that process genome scrambling, because it scrambles things up. There's a lot of changes going on. Similar disruptions do not happen in traditional breeding. And this is an important point. It's orderly process, and even the National Academy of Science report in 2004 that claimed that genetic engineering did not entail higher risks, they have a chart which clearly shows that the propensity for unintended perturbations, for unintended effects in traditional breeding through naturally available sexual pathways is very tiny, very small potential for unintended disruptions. And yet, when they show on the chart the modes of genetic engineering through which most crops on the market have been produced, many times longer bar on that bar graph, they acknowledged a much greater propensity of genetic engineering to create unexpected and unintended perturbations, changes in the organism. And yet they claim that the risks are the same. And they could only do that by actually illogic and surreptitiously changing the very definition of risk. My book goes into that. There's a chapter explaining how that report has filled with flaws. I won't go into it now, but I've demonstrated, and good scientists who've read my book and reviewed the book have stated the demonstration of the surreptitious misrepresentation of the very technical term of risk has been demonstrated. So just know, even though the National Academy of Science, the committee that produced that report, they had to admit, they had to acknowledge the clear fact that traditional breeding, pollen-based breeding, has very little risk of creating unintended disruptions, unintended side effects compared to genetic engineering, and yet they claim that genetic engineering does not entail higher risks, but only did it by a lot of subterfuge, and one of the greatest subterfuges was actually altering the technical definition of risk, which they had adhered to when it came in reports on topics other than GMOs. When it came to GMOs, their three previous reports also surreptitiously changed the definition of risk in order to argue that genetic engineering doesn't entail a higher level. It's really astounding, and that's been done by the United States premier scientific organization, done in the name of science, and has hoodwinked hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. And because of such hoodwinking that has gone on by the National Academy of Science year after year, report after report, hundreds of thousands of people have been exposed to high-risk foods. Never should have happened.